feint to a max Rockfall from Groudon. So that definitely feels more high variance. Really curious about the Gastrodon set as well. You know, Gastrodon does obviously suffer a lot against that Venusaur. And so from Paul's end, you know, I think Groudon, Venusaur definitely staples. Incineroar is typically something you want to bring against that Zacian specifically as well. So we'll see how both players approach this matchup. But eager to see which, you know, Pokemon Dynamaxes from both players' end in this one.
All right, and let's get into this match. I'm really interested to see what Paul leads here. I mean, as you said, the Charizard maybe not the best ring on Marco's side here, so Paul should be able to take a pretty good guess at what Marco's going to be bringing. Venusaur and Regieleki coming out on Paul's side here. And then we see on Marco's side of the field, the Incineroar coming out led with that Thundurus.
I like Paul's decision to not bring Groudon this time around, right? In the last game, we saw Aleki plus Groudon immediately, but Paul recognizes that Marco has that Incineroar, does not want to get intimidated. And so, you know, the Venusaur here is kind of bait as well, right? Maybe baits out a max Airstream from Marco's end, and as you see, Paul is actually going for the switch into Groudon. Now, you risk taking some damage, of course, on the Groudon, but the Groudon is very, very bulky, as we've seen, and has that Citrus Berry, so it can take, you know, a couple attacks here and there. And so Paul is actually just opting for damage onto Thundurus, and I think this is actually a really smart game plan because the Thundurus on Marco's end, we haven't seen its item yet, but it's not Life Orb, and Assault Vest is so common on Thundurus. Both of these players also have access to each other's team sheets, so, you know, Assault Vest Thundurus makes a lot of sense here. The idea is you just, you know, get a little chunk of damage off, and then you bring in the Groudon. The Thundurus can't Max Guard in front of your Groudon, and then Groudon can just launch a Max Rockfall into Thundurus if it doesn't take too much damage this turn. So I like Paul's kind of middle ground lead where, you know, you're probably going to switch Aleki or Venusaur out on turn 1, but it's kind of dependent on what Marco leads with.
Marco maxing that Thundurus right out of the gate here. The Incineroar with the fake out into the ground onslaught. Not really doing much since that was a swap this turn, and the Regieleki does hit that Thunderbolt into the Thundurus, picking up a bit of chip damage. Thundurus returning with the max Airstream. Sure enough, hitting into the ground on here and starting to get a little bit of speed on Marco's side of the field here.
Yeah, so Groudon able to come in safely, Citrus Berry not activated, and looks like, yeah, Paul's just going to opt for that Dynamax and try to get rid of the Thundurus immediately. The main question I have here is whether or not Rockfall alone is enough to pick up the KO onto Thundurus. I think Paul might be not 100% sure on that either, so to guarantee the KO, you can go for the double up. For Marco's end, I mean, you can go for like a max Airstream and another Flare Blitz into Groudon, but to be honest, I'm not even sure that picks up the knockout because the Groudon has the Citrus Berry. So, you know, Paul using that first turn to... The tough thing about playing against Sun in Series 8 is you always have to respect Sleep Powder from Venusaur on turn 1, right? So Marco does not want to potentially lose to turn 1 Sleep Powder because if you Sleep Powder something that's Dynamaxing on turn 1, like imagine if Sleep Powder goes off into Thundurus, you're in such a tough spot. And so Paul says, okay, you have to respect the Sleep Powder option. I'm just going to switch out, and it definitely gets the better end out of this first turn. Gets that Groudon in. Now, you know, typically you don't want to take that much damage with your Dynamax Pokemon before getting it in, but if you trade Thundurus for, you know, 50-75% of damage on the Groudon, I think that's actually not a terrible trade on Paul's end, especially because that Venusaur in the back, I think, is actually very critical in this matchup for the late game.
Regieleki, another Thunderbolt into the Thundurus, bringing it down below half. Thundurus firing off a max Airstream, picking up some chip on the ground on, not really doing too much damage here, and finally bringing it to the point where it can get some Citrus Berry recovery here.
So it's definitely going to be able to heal up, but, you know, I think this is exactly, I mean, Paul's Groudon's just been so bulky. There's that Flare Blitz, but yeah, with that Berry, not able to pick up the knockdown. So in the end, Paul essentially gets an extra turn of Dynamax here, and I think that's a big advantage just in terms of having something that's bulky that's around. More importantly, you knock out that Thundurus, and this Venusaur set is very hyper-offensive. With Thundurus out of the way, Venusaur now can put in a lot more work, doesn't have to worry about just getting, you know, one-hit KO to buy a Dynamax Thundurus.
100%. This is, I mean, the speed boost that Thundurus was going for, unfortunately losing all the speed control, which means Paul as well, if he wants to, can start trying to get some of the speed control back on his side of the field here with that Regieleki. Obviously, you don't really want to hit an Electro Web into that Thundurus with the Defiant, but is now free to either just attack with this Regieleki or be going for those Electro Webs. On Marco's side of the field, that Zacian is making an appearance, getting a little bit of an attack boost here with the Enchanted Sword, but with that Max Groudon still on Paul's side of the field here, doesn't seem very safe.
Yeah, and even, you know, after Groudon's Dynamax, right, Groudon ground type attacks, both super effective against the Zacian and the Incineroar here, so Paul just double checking the stats of everything and is opting for launching that Electro Web off immediately. Electro Web has been so good for Paul, and I think he's definitely in a solid position right now to just keep using a couple of those. And so Zacian here is going to protect. I think that's smart because you don't want to get hit by multiple Electro Webs, right? And you don't want the Groudon to be able to outspeed you. Paul actually opted for the protect here because he doesn't want to feint to something like a Behemoth Blade, and that likely indicates that the Groudon doesn't have that much speed investment. We've seen how bulky it is, so I think you're probably going to need 2 Electro Webs to actually be able to outspeed the Zacian with Groudon specifically. So I like the protect play from both players' ends here, but in the end, I think Marco gets a little bit ahead with his protect.
The Flare Blitz trying to attack into the Groudon to try and pick up that KO here, but unfortunately with that max guard, nothing happening from the Incineroar. The Sand Chip, though, is going to bring it down to half below health, so there is going to be some of that recovery back with this Citrus Berry. And looks like here that Paul might just go for the switch and another Electro Web to try and get some speed control.
Yeah, it's not every day you see someone try to switch their Dynamax Pokemon out, but I actually think it makes a lot of sense in this matchup specifically because you want to conserve that Groudon. You want to get the Sun Up for Venusaur in this endgame. That Venusaur has a very offensive moveset. I believe it actually has that Weather Ball, so it can hit that Zacian for super effective damage in the sun. And so with no weather control from Marco's end, I think the switch actually makes a lot of sense because Paul recognizes, hey, if I get a single speed drop onto the Zacian, it'll still outspeed and actually pick up the KO onto Groudon. So I definitely think that is the correct play in this position. Is so important to reset that weather. Charizard not really that essential in this late game as well, and Alecki is able to get that Electro Web off, which is going to grant him a lot of speed control going off towards the end of this match.
100% here. Then Zacian is going to hit the Behemoth Blade into the Charizard, I'd assume, and yes, be doing a good chunk of damage here. I mean, preserving that ground, like you said, absolutely huge. The parting shot coming out from the Zacian, going to be dropping the special attack of this Regieleki, and Marco opting to reposition a little bit and bring out his last Pokemon here, which we haven't quite seen, which will be that Gastrodon.
I think Gastrodon definitely keeps Marco in this. If it was Charizard coming in from his end, we were talking about whether or not maybe he'd bring Charizard before this matchup. It feels really, really tough to come back, right? Because Alecki just does really well. But Gastrodon definitely the best Pokemon for Marco to have right now, and I'm really curious about its set. I think the way that Paul wins this game is basically through that Venusaur. So you need to position Venusaur out in the right spot, get it in, get that Sun Up, and then put on pressure with its damage, right? Because Paul actually has very little damage against this Gastrodon otherwise, but of course Venusaur can just one-shot it with the grass type attack, especially because we've seen already that it's not a Window Berry on the Gastrodon. So Paul has the numbers advantage, and he's got some speed control here as well. I think like he basically needs to get the Venusaur in a safe spot and be able to just try to pick up like KO after KO after KO with it. Because I think, given that I believe it has that Weather Ball, it can actually probably just one-shot that Zacian and that Groudon, or the Gastrodon. And so I like the switch out here by Paul. He recognizes, hey, Groudon able to reset the weather here, and there's a chance that maybe the Zacian protects as well, so you get the Groudon in for free. Zacian actually ends up going for the switch, but I think, Paul able to get that Sun in safely.
With this reposition, there is going to be fake out pressure on Marco's side of the field, and of course the attack drop going into this Groudon. The Charizard here just going for a Heat Wave, getting some damage. Does like a good amount of damage down to this Gastrodon with that Solar Power ability, and his Scald coming out is going to pick up the KO on this Charizard here.
So, solid trade-off for both players here, but Paul actually gets a huge Heat Wave off before his Pokemon faints, and that's actually really nice, right? This Groudon is so low now, it won't faint certainly from any attack, and there's that free switching into Venusaur that I was talking about. Paul didn't risk switching it in, even sacrificed the Pokemon to get it in safely, and Venusaur's looking really, really solid right now. So Paul definitely in a pretty commanding spot right now. He has a lot of options right now, right? I think on one hand, you read the fake out from Marco's end. You also have to worry, one option is not targeting the Incineroar at all, but that's a little bit risky because then Incineroar pressures with something like a Flare Blitz, right? So looks like Incineroar's just going to offer the fake out. Paul's just opting for damage with both of the Pokemon, so Venusaur won't get the attack off, but that's Precipice Blades connects with both, and that's a lot of damage.
The Gastrodon taking a big hit here. Gastrodon, sometimes a little tricky to take out, but has been taking a lot of damage from the two hits. Is going to go for that Yawn into the Venusaur. Get a little bit of recovery as well. And this Venusaur, I mean, this Venusaur can take on this Gastrodon, but also, if you're Marco, do you really want to risk keeping the Venusaur in and having it fall asleep here?
Yeah, that's a big yawn. I was curious on, what the Gastrodon set would be here in the end for Marco, and yawn is actually a game changer here, right? So here's the situation. Now, with Marco, you can just double protect both of your Pokemon this turn, right? And then Venusaur will fall asleep. So Paul, as a response to that, as you see, wants to switch out into that Regieleki. Now, if you're Marco, you can make a big play and say, there's no way Paul's going to stay in here, because if he stays in, I could have just double protected. You could read into that Regieleki switching in and go for an attack onto that slot. So if Paul makes the correct play this turn, it really feels like he should win the game with Venusaur. If Marco is able to maybe read into the switch out that Paul's considering, though, and call it correctly, Marco still keeps himself in this game. So let's see, this is really critical whether or not the Gastrodon and the Zacian will just opt to go for the protects here, because if not, then, Paul had an opportunity to just outright win the game with either a Grass type attack and a Gastrodon or that Weather Ball into the Zacian.
Right, the Regieleki swapping in here. So interested to see how this plays out. The protect coming out from the Zacian, hitting into the Groudon here, and the Gastrodon opting for that Earth Power, big Earth Power into this Regieleki and picking up this KO here.
Yeah, so Marco didn't offer the protects, was able to predict the switch outs on Paul's end. So this is going to be a really interesting finish to the game. I wanted to say this earlier, Groudon, the turn it went for Precipice Blades and KO'd Incineroar, had the opportunity to actually go for a Swords Dance there. I was thinking Paul maybe didn't want to risk the Swords Dance in case Marco went for like the very rare play of switching the Incineroar out into Zacian, and then just let Zacian come in for free. So, I mean, Paul's Venusaur can definitely win in this scenario. It's just a question of who do you target and do you make the right target here, right? Can you read into who Marco is going to protect this turn? Because if Marco now, having not protected last turn, can protect either of his Pokemon, you either get that Yawn off into Venusaur once again, or that Behemoth Blade into the Venusaur as well from Zacian. So, Paul has to make the right target selection here. If Marco is able to predict that and call it correctly, gives him a huge advantage. So, yeah, Paul definitely had an early lead here, but Marco making really good plays in back-to-back turns to keep himself in this one. And, Venusaur looks really good here in this endgame, but it can only target one Pokemon at a time. It's going to be the Protect from Zacian. Oh!
Okay, now just see where everything is targeting into the Zacian slot here. And Groudon does go for that Sword Stance, raising the attack stat by 2, definitely applying a little bit of pressure here. The Gastrodon will hit the Earth Power into it, though. The Sword Stance isn't going to do anything. Gastrodon picking up yet another KO here, and it's just a force to be reckoned with. I mean, it's picking up all these KOs with these Earth Powers. It's getting this leftovers recovery slowly but surely, and I mean, this Venusaur can put such pressure on this Gastrodon, but Marco's done a really good job of kind of isolating it down, so Paul really has to pick what he goes after here.
Yeah, Zacian goes for the double protect, assuming that Venusaur's going to target that slot, which I think is a good play. There is that Weather Ball we've been talking about this entire time, finally coming out from the sun, able to pick up that one-hit KO. That's a really big tech that Venusaurs are running nowadays. And we know the Gastrodon has Yawn, we know it has Protect, so we'll probably go for Yawn here, Protect next turn, and then it's going to come down to sleep turns, I think, Sierra. So we'll see if the Venusaur can wake up fast enough, and this is going to be a really, really wild endgame.
And it's, I mean, Marco bringing this back as best as he can. The fact that it's coming down to sleep, I mean, a Gastrodon versus a Venusaur, sometimes you just see that the Venusaur being able to hit that 4-time effective grass move against the Gastrodon, I think it's over. But this Gastrodon doing everything it can to really bring out this end game, and the fact that this Venusaur is going to sleep, I mean, I think it really depends, like you said, on the sleep turns, as well as how much damage this Gastrodon is really going to be able to apply here.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that it doesn't have something like an Ice Beam because we've seen its full moveset, so it's just going to be Earth Power. What this boils down to is, can Paul wake up fast enough? Can he avoid maybe, Earth Power special defense drops here as well? Venusaur is going to take its first turn of sleep, so can wake up starting the next turn. Here's going to be the first Earth Power. How much does it do?
A decent chunk of damage, but it's still going to take a couple of more hits to really pick up this KO. Man, I mean, if you're Paul here, you're sitting here just praying to wake up, and on Marco's side, just praying that it stays asleep.
Oh, it stays asleep? Okay.
Second turn to sleep here, another Earth Power. Of course, not going to be picking up the KO, but Marco just needs one more turn of sleep here to be sealing this game up.
Oh, it all comes down to this. Venusaur needs to wake up on this final turn. Does it take a third turn of sleep? It does!
Oh no! Marco able to hit a third Earth Power into that Venusaur and pick up that victory. I mean, I feel like it's not every day that you see Gastrodon go 1v1 versus a grass type and pull out a win, but Marco played that so well, being able to get that yawn, being able to isolate it, put it to sleep, and just chip away at it until finally...
Doozy. I mean, that was just absolutely wild.
Sometimes you just need a little bit of luck going your way, and like you said, Marco did what he could to position himself into that end game to where he could use that luck to seal off a win. But without any further ado, let's get into game 2 to see what these players can do. All right, heading into this game 2 here, Marco starting with that Gastrodon next to the Incineroar, Regieleki and Charizard coming out on Paul's side of the field.
Yeah, so definitely some adjustments here on both ends. You know, Marco actually leading Gastrodon despite Paul leading Venusaur last time, so I think Marco actually getting the better end of the trade-off in terms of the lead matchup here. Charizard's a pretty interesting adjustment here because we know that Gastrodon has Yawn. Yawn is really, really good against Paul's team because, you know, Paul really wants to just overwhelm with this Dynamax damage in the early game. And you can see here, Paul's actually going for that max airstream onto Incineroar. So if Gastrodon decides here to just go for a Yawn onto Charizard, it will give Marco some good early game positioning. Anytime you get a Yawn off against, you know, anything that's Dynamaxing, it's a great start.
Of course, Regieleki swapping out for that Groudon as Paul is going for that Max Charizard. Setting the Sun as well, so Charizard will be doing extra damage here with that Solar Power ability on top of the Life Orb that it already has here.
So let's see. Does Gastrodon protect? It doesn't! Wow, okay.
Big airstream coming out from the Charizard onto the Incineroar. Incineroar holding on with just a little bit of health here. I feel like Incineroar can almost survive any hit once. just barely clinging on and is going to get that berry to get a bit of health back.
Yeah, unbelievable survival there. Even gets the parting shot off into Groudon. That's absolutely huge because we know this is a Swords Dance Groudon set. So able to switch out. And if that Gastrodon actually went for that Yawn onto Charizard, that is a great turn 1 for Marco. He needs to basically weather the early storm, or early sun, I should say, in this matchup. And so able to get that, you know, positioning out, psycho that instant back in for future fake outs and intimidates is really valuable as well. And so, you know, I think Paul there didn't go for that max airstream onto Gastrodon because he was expecting Gastrodon to protect, right? One approach you could see Marco taking in this game is protecting Gastrodon turn 1 and then switching out into Thundurus on turn 2 so that Gastrodon just doesn't take any damage from max airstreams. But Marco makes a really aggressive prediction there, saying, I just don't think you're going to max airstream into the Gastrodon, or perhaps Gastrodon's just really, really specially defensive and Marco is expecting to survive a max airstream there, and it is going to be that Yawn into that Charizard.
No, that is a huge yawn here. I mean, in Paul's position now, what do you want to be doing with that Charizard?
Yeah, that is such a good question. I mean, the reality is that, like, the residual effect from G-Max Wildfire is so strong, like, I think Paul feels forced to basically stay in with the Charizard, go for that Wildfire into that Thundurus slot. From Marco's end, you could easily switch that Thundurus out back into Incineroar. That takes the Wildfire, gets another Intimidate off against the Groudon, and it feels like a relatively safe switch. So, yeah, looks like Thundurus is going to pull out that switch, and it should be Incineroar.
Incineroar hitting the field yet again with the Intimidate onto that Groudon. With the parting shot last turn and the Intimidate this turn, definitely slowly be bringing it down here. The Charizard, of course, with that Wildfire into it. I mean, didn't need to do too much damage to pick up that KO here. Either way, Incineroar is going to go down. The G-Max Wildfire effect, as you said, is going to be doing a lot for him here upcoming turn. Groudon going for that Sword Stance, trying to build back its attack stat after all of those stat drops, and Gastrodon just opting for the Yawn into the Groudon as well.
Yeah, these Yawns are really, really good for Marco. They're such a strong option right now, and they're able to basically disrupt Paul a lot right now. And so that Charizard is going to fall asleep, right? And that's already tough because you basically lose a turn of your max here. In addition, you have now put on pressure against Groudon. Groudon got that Sword Stance off, but that only puts it back at neutral anyway, right? So it's not actually doing that much damage. And now Marco is able to just Dynamax and maybe overwhelm Paul with offense, right? I think Dynamax Thundurus is really strong, especially because Paul this time around isn't going to be able to Dynamax that Groudon. Groudon here in a really tricky spot as well, right? Because it's currently affected by Yawn. And so I really like how Marco played the first 2 turns. You know, a little bit risky, especially because maybe that Life Orb Max Airstream could have just knocked out that Groudon, or sorry, the Gastrodon in the beginning of the match. But now Marco positioning himself to have multiple extra turns of Dynamax relative to Paul. And with that Zacian that he has in the back, I mean, all it takes is 1 speed boost onto that, and Zacian is really just gonna, you know, outspeed pretty much everything on Paul's end. And so great start to the game for Paul, or for Marco here for sure.
Charizard sleeping off that last turn of Dynamax here, as you said. Attack coming out from the ground is going to be picking up a little bit of chip, but that's all it is just a bit of chip here as we see the max airstream hit into that Charizard. Good amount of damage, as well as starting to get some speed boost on Marco's side of the field.
Yeah, I mean, every speed boost definitely critical here, and with the Gastrodon being able to just go for inert power there, I mean, that covers for any switch out options, and you know, Paul gets a little bit of damage off, sure, but this Thunder is still has 2 turns of Dynamax, and this time around, you don't have something to just knock out it immediately the subsequent turn, right? So, yeah, I think Marco definitely in a much better spot than he was in that early game last time around, because he kind of has the Dynamax advantage, and once again, it's the Yawns that are so critical here. Paul really had no option with that Charizard slot. I mean, maybe you can consider switching out, but Charizard at this point is not doing anything for Paul, so he basically wants Marco to actually pick up the knockout onto that. Now, both of Paul's Pokemon asleep. He's in definitely a tricky spot right now. I mean, you're hoping for Marco to kind of just knock you out and maybe give you free switch-ins. I'm actually kind of surprised that Paul's not withdrawing the Groudon out here to maybe reconserve that weather, but he's going to be able to bring in that Zacian on Marco's end, and now Marco, you know, if you go for an Airstream there, that's exactly what you want, right? Give a speed boost onto that Zacian. Now you have a +1 attack Zacian with that speed boost as well, and that looks really, really scary in this end game.
Yeah, Zacian with that attack boost, with the, from its Tepid Sword, with that speed boost, I mean, it already hit so hard, and being able to just be so fast and so strong can really put a lot of pressure onto Paul here. The Charizard is going to get knocked out. Groudon, of course, with its first turn of sleep. The Wildfire damage is going to be getting some chip onto Marco's side of the field here, and I'm interested to see what Paul is going to do to respond to this Zacian here, because the Zacian is starting to look a little scary.
Definitely a little bit scary here, and getting a speed boost onto that is very, very critical as well. So let's see. I think that this time around, I mean, yeah, Marco's just in a much better position. It does a really great switch out as well. It recognizes, hey, Gastrodon's not really going to do much for me at this point, so might as well get that speed boost and really get the ball rolling. So, and the main, I think, tricky thing for this game for Paul was that the Yawns have just disrupted him so much, right? He felt pressure to stay in with both Pokemon the turns that the Yawns happen, but as a result, you know, you take a guaranteed turn to sleep afterwards, and now Paul is effectively, you know, playing like a 1v2 in these scenarios. So it's just a really tough spot for him to be in, and I mean, if he doesn't get early wake-ups, like with this Groudon, for example, I don't really see how he comes back into this match, to be honest, other than maybe trying to crit Thundurus with like a Thunderbolt, for example, but really tough spot for him to be in right now.
Well, I wouldn't really want to be counting on the early wake-ups, considering what we saw in the end of the last game. Zacian is going to be going for that Protect. Thundurus going with the Max Knuckle into the Regieleki, dealing about half of its health here. But this is starting to get to be a really, really scary situation. Marco getting the attack boost on both of his Pokemon. The Zacian already had an attack boost already onto it from that Intipit Sword, as well the Airstream boost with the speed. And there's going to be some more Wildfire chip onto Marco's side, but these Pokemon are just going to be so fast and so strong that even if they're slowly getting damage chipped away, I feel like they're in a position where they can just start to overpower all of Paul's Pokemon here.
Overpowered for sure, yeah. And I think the main thing here is just these speed boosts, right? You've kind of weathered the storm of Paul's Dynamax. You put yourself in a position now where you can outspeed consistently, and you know, Zasha's taking damage, but it's not getting KO'd anytime soon right now. So yeah, I think really outstanding play here from Marco to put himself in just a fantastic spot. And this Thunderous plus Zacian is just so difficult to deal with in this endgame, because all Marco needs to do is exactly how he's playing this right now. Just go for safe plays. No need to risk anything. You've got in speed boost onto both of your Pokemon, so outspeeding that Alecki is really critical. And now there's no need to even make any predictions, right? You know, Groudon was able to wake up, but the question is, how much can it really offer at this point? Venusaur's the last one, but I mean, this is why I was kind of surprised Paul didn't switch out that Groudon earlier, because now you're in a really tricky spot where you can't get the sun up. And I think the explanation for why Paul maybe didn't switch out was because of the fact that he didn't want to just switch in Venusaur and have that take any damage. But now Marco's just going to outspeed with both Pokemon on his end. You know the movesets on both Pokemon, so you know that the Venusaur here can't actually do very much other than maybe a Sleep Powder. And so Marco can, you know, safely double up into that slot. As soon as Venusaur goes down, that should be game over. So Paul at this point is basically hoping for a mistake from Marco's end, hoping that for some reason Marco targets down the Groudon. But yeah, looks like he's going to start this off with a Wild Charge into Venusaur.
Picking up a little bit of chip here, also taking a bit of recoil damage. Zacian going for that Behemoth Blade. This is going to be a huge attack here, dealing massive damage to that Venusaur, and sure enough, doubling into that slot, picks up that KO, and it's just this Groudon against the world now. And I mean, I don't think it can really do too much. Paul, recognizing that as well, is just going to opt to back out of the game here, saying GG over to Marco. I think Marco played that really well. The Gastrodon at the beginning of the game, and just being so bold to just go for those yawns, despite the fact that it can take such big damage from the beginning, I think really put Marco in a good position there and really kind of put Paul on the back burner, so Marco could pick up a good game and take that 2-2 up.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the Gastrodon play.